Okay, I'm going to call this Assembly Budget and Finance Committee of the whole. Get it going? I'm just going to call to order. Okay, first let's start with introductions.
Alex Lipka, Chief Fiscal Officer. Lance Wilbur, Office of Management and Budget.
You want to go, Fred?
Dyson.
Austin Quinn Davidson.
Felix Rivera.
Thanks, Alex. Crystal Kennedy.
Pete Peterson.
Forrest Dunbar.
And since we only have a few audience members, do you want to identify yourselves too?
Mike Chadwick, Internal Audit.
Colin Ricewick, Treasury.
Noel Plata, Budget Advisory Commission.
And we have Desiree, who is Assembly staff as well. Okay, Lance, why don't you go ahead and take it away for item A?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Do an update on the 2019 and 2020 budgets.
So as of yesterday, the December month had not yet closed, but it would be very, very close. And so our year-end 2019 expenditures are wrapping up. Departments have got all of their submissions in, and now Alex's team and the controller is chewing up the information that we have there. That will give us the true year-end number. As of the end of November, which is the last month that I have for expenditures, we were at about 91.5% spent through the year. The amount of expenditures were at about 87%, so we're very, very close. There are many of those things in there that include our contributions to our general liability and workman's comp, and our contributions to some contractual obligations in Chris's office that had not been accounted for. So those will be very close. I do expect on the expenditure side, we are aware and continue to be aware that the fire department will be over, but they are doing a very good job of making that number smaller. The Chief Petrick is doing a very good job. As I mentioned before, Chief Dahl and the police department, we know they are also going to be over. There's a lot of overtime in their dispatch, so we're waiting for them to close their year end. On the positive side, the early part of the year in the maintenance operations, the street maintenance portion of our overall budget continues to be good. The heavy snow that we got at the end of the year, the plowing and all that we took place, that was primarily all in our 2020 budget. So it snowed on New Year's Eve. We didn't do much, and then the hauling was pretty much all done in 2020. So we will be truing all of that up here in the coming weeks at your next assembly meeting, not on the 24th or on the 28th, but the first one in February. You'll have your November, and if we can get December closed, we'll have a year-end December report for you as well. So, the things that we are aware of, they haven't changed significantly. Let Alex speak to the revenue side. Again, as Dan mentioned last time, we're still positive 1.5 to 2 million on the revenue side of the world. So that's our last report. So that's what's going on in 2019.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So with the fire department, my understanding is there's been no other closures.
Yep.
Is that true?
Yep, that's my understanding as well. Okay. For 2020, obviously the budgets are done, the budgets are loaded. I met with my team yesterday. This afternoon I will be sending out a first quarter budget schedule. And that will include sort of all of the detailed steps. Working with Desiree, we've already scheduled the work sessions for you for first quarter budget revisions in April. So I think there's a couple of them in April. So those are already scheduled. Look forward to those. So look for the schedule this afternoon. We'll be sending out to directors. In summary, we'll be sending out guidance at the end of this month to the department heads. We'll be asking departments to send their submissions to us by the end of February. Then we will be compiling those, we'll be presenting them to the senior leadership staff in early March. They will make some decisions, we'll present them to the mayor, we'll prepare it, and we'll be getting it to you in April. The schedule will be, we'll give it to you after April 7th. So for the April 14th assembly meeting, it will likely be an addendum to the agenda because we won't be able to get the regular agenda on April 3rd because we want to give it to you after the election, so we incorporate all of the debt and all of those things that will be incorporated as part of planning passage. How will those work?
Lance, can I just note that we've been joined by Mr. Wellington?
That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Any questions on 2019 and I guess 2020 and what we're doing with the first quarter positions? And Suzanne LaFrance has just joined us too. Okay. Guess guess we can move on to Mr. Slivka's report, the MOA financial status.
So we'll start by asking Paula to talk a little bit about any updates in terms of revenue.
Basically, we are increased in, we have increased through the marijuana tax, and that's not too awful much, just 100,000. We're still expecting a PILT payment from Aurora Housing to come in, and we just received a, what is it, a credit benefit from MEA of $33,000 yesterday in the mail. All the taxes are pretty much within line of what they have been, and we're, like Alex said, about just under 2 million over in revenue.
Okay, Mr. Dunbar has a question.
Yeah, two questions actually. So, I'm sorry, you said a PILT expected from Aurora Housing?
Yes.
I'm not, could you explain, remind me what Aurora Housing is, what you're
Okay,
talking about
Aurora
there?
Housing is the company, the LLC, that is running the housing on J Bear.
Okay.
Okay,
Right.
and they pay us,
Right.
PILT, money in lieu of taxes.
Right.
For the housing, the base. And we get an annual, increment for that, and it's raised every year based on, an E level that comes in a percentage of what the actual occupancy was on base housing.
Because follows to that, and I've got a separate question. So, two things on that. One, about how much is the PILT typically? And then two, I assume, so, you know, they just reconstructed some large new barracks on base. When they shift folks into those barracks, does that then reduce our, because they don't pay property taxes on the barracks, right?
No,
Just
they do not.
the separate housing?
Just the housing.
Okay. And so about how much is the PILT typically?
The PILT is usually around $500,000.
I guess I'll expand on that a bit. So, I mean, then you're aware there's a long history behind why it's built not a property tax. It deals with state legislation. We're in the process of reviewing everything to make sure that that is accurate. I think the total number is closer to 1.6 million, but we are actively looking at what is the valuation of that property and are we receiving what we're supposed to be receiving.
What's 1.6 million? You said 500,000.
So the total PILT, there's 3 sections.
Well, yes, there's 3 sections.
Yeah,
There's
of
a phase
the
1, phase 2,
of
and
the
phase
installation. There's about 4,000 units of housing
Yeah.
there. I believe the current assessed value of that is somewhere in excess of 400 million. But we're examining that from the standpoint of, you know, is the PILT we're receiving in line with the agreements that we have
Yes.
signed with them? And it was due in October, so is it 2 months late?
No, it's actually, I noticed it's due at the end of the year.
Okay.
So we usually receive the payment, well, we send out an invoice right around May 1st. So it'll be about another month before we will hear from Aurora Housing on what the level of housing is, what's built, and what the occupancy is.
Okay.
I have another question, my
Sure.
second question, but it's on a different topic, so I don't know if Felix is.
Or any of the, Mr. Dyson was next.
Go ahead.
New topic, okay.
Oh, so my new topic is, I'm trying to remember what the implementation date of Tobacco 21 was. But if it has been implemented already, have we seen any impact on tax revenue?
We're supposed to start in August.
So we did. So we've had 4 months now of Tobacco 21. Have we seen any fall in, you know, year-over-year tobacco tax revenues?
Yes, we have a little bit, yeah.
Like, what's a little bit? Like, how much
Well, I
tobacco
have
consumption do we
seen-
think it's been happening?
About, I would say it's about 500,000. No, it's about.
But only probably from those 4 months, is that?
I mean, that
That's
seems
the-
pretty sizable. I mean, that kind of being.
To expand, tobacco revenue has been in a slow decline for
Yeah.
several years.
Okay.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Okay, hang on, but Mr. Dyson, you were next.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So,
She's in there, she's just.
do we have any current problems, a pattern of it on our accounts receivable? People who don't pay?
Yes, we do.
And would you kind of run down the superstars in that category?
I don't know that off the top of my head anymore. I'm not actually in the receivable, so I will find that out for you.
Well, but I bet these guys can give me a rough idea.
In terms of, I think overall, when we're billing out total property tax in the 550 million, I think how much has actually been unpaid. We'll get it for you, but it's somewhere in the under 30 million.
Okay, and do they fall into any categories?
I can get the details for you in terms of.
Yeah, and I don't need real accuracy, but.
I would say that remembering that because we have first lien ability, we generally, by the time a year has passed, we're down to maybe 1 or 2% uncollected.
All right, and just a detail, 1 or 2%, okay. The state for a significant period of time had their people that chased accounts receivable also chasing the folks who had court-ordered restitution to victims. And they were doing really well. And the state law allowed them to capture for their own operating expenses a percentage on top of what the court-ordered thing. But I think we have no function like that.
I will get you some detail on exactly how we
Are you-
mingle those two.
Pardon me. Are you asking if we have a function where we have a division that is actively collecting as a first-party collector?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a division, it can even be a
Okay,
person.
yes,
but-
we actually do, and since we moved to SAP, each of the departments are kind of supposed to be collecting their debt themselves, but we also have a DCF, which is in charge of all the write-offs and sending it to PCS, which is our third-party collector. And so we have a whole group of about 6 people that work on that daily.
And I may have missed it, but are they after unpaid debts for citizens who have court-ordered restitution coming from them?
Yes, in part.
Okay, and that's good, and so on. And I'm glad you have a skip chase, Dog the Bounty Hunter.
Something for you to consider after April, maybe. Bounty hunter, hired hand, Mr. Dyson. Okay, Suzanne, I think you're next.
Oh, thank you,
Are you done,
Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Dyson?
Yeah,
Okay.
I've been, in lots of ways.
Oh, thanks. Would one of you be able to review a little bit on the tobacco and marijuana taxes, just because we've been getting a lot of questions in this revenue discussion as far as these are both excise taxes and the percentages for those?
I don't know, Paula, do you know the percentages that we're charging for tobacco and marijuana?
12%
For both?
for both, although we're putting out to increase by 2%.
I think marijuana is 5 and tobacco's 12. We'll verify.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
John, is it about that topic?
Yeah,
Because
so
we have some
when
people
is the
queuing.
next date for the marijuana tax?
I'm not sure I'll have.
We can do it every 2 years. We did it.
We can do it every 2 years.
in the
I
past.
think 2020 would be the next time, because I think the last time we
That
just
would be
did
this
was
year.
the 18th.
When does that need to be done then?
I don't know, Mr. Weddleton.
Did it start at 5 and we've never adjusted?
That's correct. But we did have it come to us to bump it up, and we chose not
We
to.
didn't.
And that's why I forgot,
That was
every
before
2
me.
years we get another look at it, so.
Are you done, Ms. France? Okay, great. Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So going back to PILT, through our membership in the National Association of Counties, I've been looped in on some federal changes on the PILT and SRS. Are any of those changes affecting us in our budget situation?
I am not aware, but I will find out.
Thank you.
Hang on one second. Ms. Salatel?
Thank you. So I've had a question come up about outstanding unpaid debts by residents, both the total amount and then the rate of payment. And they would like that kind of information within the tax discussion. So for timing purposes. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Weddleton?
So if we move the revenue from the marijuana tax under the tax cap, so if we raise it 2%, does that stay above for a brief time, or does it immediately just replace property tax?
I think the way the original ordinance was written, if it was, it would continue to be under the cap.
We had a brief moment, I think we had a brief moment of time, right? We could have
2
raised it
years.
and the cap would have jumped, and so essentially would have had like new revenue. But now, we've passed the point where any increase in the alcohol and marijuana tax just offsets
So
property
that
tax.
first shot would have bumped it up.
And why didn't we do that? Just no political will to do it?
It came, well, not to, be too negative, but it kind of came last minute. Like, I think people didn't realize it was coming, and like a couple weeks before we had the deadline, it was introduced, and then we didn't really have a discussion about it, and then the marijuana industry came and said, we're struggling, don't do this, and
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Mr. Weddleton, are you done?
I'm done, thank you.
Okay.
So, just some additional information to remind everybody. When we do the accounting, it's not just as Lance said, we close 12 months and then we have all the information. We actually have months 13, 14, 15, 16 where additional aspects of the financial reporting are conducted. So generally those months don't get closed until end of February, early March. And that's when we actually get the final full picture on the revenue and expenses and what the fund balance will be. And I'll just remind you that because of the $8 million we spent on earthquake, that no matter how good a job we do from a budget standpoint, it's still going to be a negative fund balance. And so that when we roll into this discussion for first quarter budget revisions, it's going to be how are we going to balance off this $8 million earthquake expense. I will say to the positive, we are starting to see FEMA money roll in. We did get a $500,000 payment, which was very specifically for Eagle River roads. But we are now in the process where we should start to see additional FEMA monies rolling in to help offset that $8 million we've spent already.
Mr. Weddleton has a question about that?
I thought we did something where we, at some point, saying we don't have to pay that $8 million back this year, we can spread it out.
So what we did and what you passed was I don't want to use the word exemption, but an allowance to not meet code requirement for fund balance. Because in the emergency ordinance that you passed at the end of 2018, you allowed us to tax for it. And so at some point, when we've gone through all the reimbursement, we're going to possibly have some money left, and then we're going to figure out, is it enough that we should tax for it, or should we find another source?
So basically, we can spread it out over a number of years.
We can carry the unspent balance. We can carry that deficit in that account in our fund balance. It just reduces our overall fund balance.
So we don't have to get $8 million to fill that hole this year.
That'll be a discussion in terms of how we address it.
Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, in terms of fund balance, I think we can have most of this discussion offline, but the sooner that we can get a picture of what fund balance is going to be for first quarter, I think is going to be helpful, because there are some members who I think are probably interested in doing things in the first quarter budget revisions, and if we don't actually have any money to do things, then that's a lot less work that we have to do.
I'm telling you that you will not have any money, because no matter what happens, that $8 million sits there. It has to be accounted for because we spent it. And so our fund balance in excess of our reserve policy will be a big negative. But we won't know the exact number until near the end of March.
Sorry, you just say fund balance will be what?
So we have, our code requires us to maintain a fund balance of roughly 12% of our revenues.
Yeah.
And we'll call it a $52 million number.
Yep.
And so when we think about first quarter budget revisions, if we run a revenue in excess of expense. And so let's say instead of having 52 million, we have 54 million. So that's 2 million that the assembly can say, well, how could we spend that money? Because
Downtown Flowers.
Right. What I'm saying is that because of the earthquake expenditures, we know for certain that we were right around the $52 million at the end of 2018. At the end of 2019, assuming if we hit a balanced budget, we will be below that by $8 million
okay.
because of the earthquake.
Yeah, so there's no funds available.
There's going to be no positive.
All right, I just
fund
want to be
balance.
clear. You didn't need that much of an answer, but
Right.
thank you.
Sorry.
Ms. Salatel?
Thank you. So this isn't a surprise that this
No,
is going to be this
not a
way.
surprise.
Then I'm really quite confused why the administration, as we talked about the budget, said, let's put a lot of this off for first quarter in terms of budgeting for certain things as we were negotiating what was a priority to get passed before for the 2020 budget and what could be handled in first quarter. Is there any context you can give me for that?
Certainly, because if you'll remember the budgetary discussions, a lot of it was around the next big thing, which is the probable sale of ML&P and the funds that will become available because of that. So the decision from the RCA, we believe now, I think they could ask for another 2 weeks, will be at the end of February. Hopefully, based on the stipulated agreements, they approve it. And we are targeting May 29th as the day that the transaction closes. All else being the same, there will be some excess monies after all of the agreed upon set-asides, both for rate reduction as well as the treatment center. And that number is somewhere around 10 to 12 million in terms of cash money left over. Additionally, the conversation has been, the budget actually anticipates that because we're putting 200 plus million into the MOA trust, that will allow us to move the dividend rate to 5% on the amount, and so that where before we thought we were going to get 6.6 million, the number that's in the budget right now, I believe, is 10.5 million, and that number could be marginally higher.
Do you want to follow up, and then
Yeah.
Mr. Dunbar?
So the ML&P difference that there may be, that's for debts only though, if I understand correctly.
So after all the money is spent, all the debt is defeased, everything else is taken care of, we should have roughly $10 million of cash that will fall to the municipality.
But that will be after first quarter budget revision.
Well, will we know the amount before? Because if
We
they-
will have a pretty good idea when you're in the middle of the discussions, because if the RCA approves on February 28th, then we're actually going to sign all the documentation on May 24th for a May 29th closure, and so we will know, and we'll be using March 31 data to make those assumptions, and so we will have a very good idea of how much money is going to be available.
And then if I may, the 5% dividend, isn't that already, didn't we already kind of take that and project that into the budget for next year? And that was Mr. Dunbar's amendments.
You did.
Okay.
We could also look at the possibility of adjusting how the dividend is calculated. Right now, it is a 5-year look back. Okay, so that means you have 5 years on a quarterly basis. You have 18 quarters of 160 odd million, and then 1 quarter of 380 million. Well, we might suggest that we could change the way we look at that in order to capture more quickly 5% of the total fund balance.
But that's just the dividend, not the 10 to 12, right?
Right. No, but that
Yeah.
makes a big difference.
It does. I'm just saying, she asked about the budget and whether it incorporated the dividend. But it
The-
didn't incorporate the 10 to 12, which is what would counteract the 8.
Correct. It did not.
Mr. Dunbar? Or Meg, are you done?
I really don't understand the 10 to 12 million, so maybe you can educate me more
Sure.
about that a little offline.
I mean, we can.
Very simply, we're selling the whole utility. Utility ML&P has a whole bunch of cash. Part of the stipulation agreement was that 50 million of that cash is going to go towards rate reduction. 15 million of that cash is going to go towards the treatment center. But after all of that, $3 million is going to go towards paying our PERS liability. But after all that's said and done, there's still going to be about $10 million of cash that will come to the municipality, which will functionally take our fund balance up by $10 million.
I'm having a hard time reconciling that with what I thought the restrictions on the money were. I thought that there were restrictions that either had to go into the trust.
Right,
or
those are the
pay
proceeds.
debt.
So we're going to get $700 million
So this
cash.
is outside of the proceeds. This is
Right, this
something-
is assets that are already on ML&P's books, that when we sold the utility, we just sold the stuff, but we get to keep some of the stuff, including the cash.
Is it like savings? They have?
Well, it's like
Yeah.
their working cash.
Yeah, exactly.
Their working capital, yeah. I mean, it's the accumulated earnings over all the years of ML&P, and the municipality through ML&P being the owners of the utility, for owning it on behalf of the community. And so for many years, we weren't allowed to take a dividend, so money has accumulated on their balance sheet.
And why is this just coming to the municipality and not to the ratepayers in some way? Because they,
Well, the ratepayers in the municipality are functionally the same people. I mean, this is why we negotiated the $50 million rate reduction.
okay.
So if you think about how much cash is there, the vast majority of it is coming back to the ratepayers in the form of rate reduction. But when you think about the other piece of it, I mean, if it's $10 million that we can spend on something, it's $10 million we don't have to raise taxes for.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Salto. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. So the FEMA money, it's just $8 million what we're asking for, right?
It's what we spent so far.
Is it also what we have requested? And so we've gotten $500,000 so far. I'm curious how much we've requested and sort of what our anticipated, both the percentage we hope to get back or we think we might realistically get back, and then what the time frame is. So by April, for example, could we have gotten more FEMA payments?
We could. I will get you the detail on what our expectations are. Some of that is wrapped up in this same discussion that you've seen with the school district, in that some of the money that is for actual facilities, we do need to get that same insurance commissioner letter that affirms that earthquake insurance is uneconomic, and that they will recommend to FEMA that we not be required to carry earthquake insurance, in which case then we would take the FEMA money for the facilities. If that scenario, as you've heard from the school district, if that scenario does not pan out, FEMA does say you must have earthquake insurance, then we have a decision to make, because it would be uneconomic for us to take the FEMA money because of the insurance requirement.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Dyson?
Some of this is money from MLP is going to the trust.
The bulk of it were $230-odd million.
Yeah, when did we make that decision, or?
That was the decision that was negotiated when the sale was allowed to proceed, that the money would go to retired debt and or be placed in the MOA trust. Those were the uses of the proceeds.
Last
Yeah.
fall, I think, right?
It was
fall,
yeah.
November.
So-
When was that?
I think it's
I'll have let's go to it.
Mr. Rivera?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So, just as a reminder to the body, this was one of the things when we had those special work sessions where we talked about ML&P, we talked about Academy of Vanguard, and we went through and just talked about, do we want to pay off debts or do we want to put it in the trust? And in the end, the conversation I remember was, let's put it in the trust. And I believe that was part of the budget, was putting it in the trust. So is it in there? Well, it'll be in there
The
after the sale, right?
The assumption for the dividend was
Right.
that we would put it in the trust.
Yes.
We haven't actually done it yet.
Do you want to follow up? Crystal, you'll be next. Let Mr. Dyson follow up.
So that decision we've made is it kind of irrevocable? We couldn't go back and say, the money we can use for current expenses could come from that trust.
Well, so two things. One, I believe it was the ballot measure that the voters approved specified that the funds would go to pay off debt or be deposited in the MOA trust.
Okay.
I believe that's, so
All
that's,
right,
we're working
all right.
on that mandate.
Yeah, all right, I got it.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Kennedy.
Well, then I'm actually very confused because my understanding from the last conversations was we were actually waiting till the final sale to even know what that number was going to be. And we wouldn't have that information until February something or other. And at that time, we would in some way, shape, or form have some kind of resolution that said where this money would go. That we were talking about at least a $200 million into the trust fund, but that knowing that there was another maybe 25 to 35 million that we might want to do something else with. And I know I had mentioned potentially using it to pay off the school bond debt that the state was not going to be paying. So I'm really either very confused, if anything, I'm very concerned that it wasn't clear in terms of a actual decision we were making. There was conversation, but at no point do I remember there being a vote on exactly what we were doing.
Is it possible that we decided to include the dividend in the budget, and so there was sort of an underlying assumption that we would place the money into the trust account,
And
but
that's
not
okay.
an actual decision to do so?
I believe what Ms. Quinn-Davidson said is correct. I believe that there is still an action point in terms of how much does go into the MOA trust, because there are some other debts that could
Exactly.
be choose to be paid off.
Yes, yeah, SAP, you're right, yes, I remember that. Okay, so can we be clear on that? Can we actually
Right, these
make
are
a
based
statement or
on-
something that says,
on a number
this
of
is what we
assumptions.
have done, this is what we haven't done yet?
Right.
So, because, like I said, I don't think we actually had a vote on actually what we were doing with that 200 and whatever the number is, because we don't actually know what that number is yet. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, good. Glad we got that squared away. Anybody else have any questions?
No, but this is very helpful.
Yeah.
It is.
I will preview for you at what is also going to be introduced at the meeting on the 28th for discussion on the 11th is the PERS termination ordinances that need to be passed. And that is, mandated by law, and that will result, as already has been assumed, in roughly a $3 million payment to the state, plus $1 million payments every year for the next 25 odd years.
What do you mean PERS termination? Terminating
So MLMP employees go away, so those
what?
positions
Oh,
go
for
away.
MLMP. Okay, got it. That makes sense. Sorry. Okay, I think
That's it.
we'll go ahead and move on. Thank you, Mr. Slivka. Were you raising your hand, Mr. Rivera?
Nope.
No. Okay. Mr. Clauda, do you want to give us an update? And he'll probably include this, but next Friday, the BAC is having a strategic planning session. And so I'd appreciate it if members have something that they'd like the BAC to be working on. Mr. Dunbar and I are both going to go to that for part of it in the morning, and we're going to be talking about topics that the BAC can engage with the Assembly on. So you can give us more info about that, but just be thinking about that if you have ideas you want to pass along to them or to us.
Thank you. Yes, so Nolan Clauda, Chair of the Budget Advisory Commission. So a couple things to update the Assembly on since I last addressed you is that we held a December 16th or 17th, I think was the date, work session on revenues for the municipality on new revenues. So we did receive a presentation from Jason Bockenstead about several, globally, several different options for revenue, broad-based and kind of specialty taxes. And we also got a presentation from Moira Gallagher from the Project 20s effort as well. And then we had some discussion and questions about all the ideas on the table. In our last meeting, which was just held last week, we finished that conversation with a discussion on the alcohol tax, and we drafted with Lance's help a resolution for our position on revenues at this time. And we do like the concept of Project 20s, but we don't have we aren't recommending pushing it onto the ballot at this point. I think that our group did feel like there's a good vision to it, that maybe needs more time to come to full fruition. So whether we decide to devote some more time to that in the coming year is something we can discuss. Actually, it may come out of our strategy session. It's something that the group may decide. But what we are backing was and you guys probably saw our resolution. I think it got to you before Tuesday's meeting. But it is the version of the alcohol tax that the earlier introduced version that was backed by Ms. Quinn Davidson, Mr. Dunbar, and Mr. Rivera, that favors the 5% tax, and the use of the funds. The language between the two versions, I believe, was a little bit different, but the language for money being used for police, first responders, child abuse, substance abuse, mental health services, and a few other items. We favored that language, and we put a couple of other terms in our preference for that as well, including that the campaign in favor of an alcohol tax has some fundraising benchmarks, I think, as you guys all know, and they don't want to advance the effort if they don't think they're going to meet the fundraising targets, because the industry is obviously going to push back on it pretty hard. So we thought that was a very sensible option as well. So we backed that as well with the 5% starting amount versus the 2%. We lean towards the 5% amount. Of course, the preference for it passing with 50% plus 1 as well. Those were sort of our broad strokes on it. We did say that, should this not move forward, we do have a preference for new revenue sources that are above the cap, and that are not primarily to be used for property tax relief. Not that property tax relief offset with another tax is not a good thing, but just that our main preference was for additional revenues for the municipality.
Mr. Dyson?
So was a consumer tax, i.e. sales tax, considered by the law?
It was, yes. Through the chair, we did devote some discussion to it in that meeting. The preferences of our group did lean a lot more towards backing. We feel like probably a lot of others that we have to really focus on what revenue proposals to back, and that it's probably difficult to put too many on the ballot at once. And so we did feel that the alcohol tax would probably be a higher priority for us to focus on than the sales tax that you had sponsored, I believe. That was the preference of the group.
Why?
Mainly because the alcohol tax was pretty targeted towards areas of high need. It's probably less political capital to push it forward. The lower threshold for 50% passage versus a 60% passage, I think, were some of the reasons, and just generally the group's preferences for that.
If I may, what you just said about it was more targeted, I think is completely fallacious. The sales tax is very targeted on public safety and treatment and all that kind of thing. So I think that was an erroneous judgment on all use part. But I appreciate the political capital and the chance of success, but I expect from you all, the first one is the principles that we're working on, broad-based tax as opposed to a targeted one. Is that a better economic principle, rather than a targeted one? And then also property tax relief is a significant encouragement to development and more, businesses moving, more employment, all those kind of things. So you guys didn't have that part of the discussion. Please, these are kindly questions, not critical. Well, maybe critical, but yeah.
That's all right.
Yeah, it should be. Yeah. I always find the disgusting thing about my critics is how often they're right.
I think that must be his most frequent funny quote.
Well, let the records reflect that I got something right one time.
Yeah, right. Let the record reflect I was actually right.
But to address some of your points, I think, and you're right, it is targeted obviously because it was for bulk of the revenue. The new revenue would be split between property tax relief and public safety, right? And so not to give that short shrift. I think there were some concerns about being a temporary thing that goes towards hiring people that are then going to have to be job headcount reduced later on and stuff like. There were some issues around that, but I don't think that it wasn't that we pulled apart that proposal and disagreed with it adamantly. It was just much more that I think our interest and support congealed around the alcohol tax more so. There, you know, and I think that our group would probably have some interesting discussion around the, you know, using new revenue for property tax or leaving property taxes versus other taxes. But we didn't go too far into that. There is always the concern about regressivity, but definitely differences of opinion on that. So that was the version that we backed, and that's what we feel is probably the Minnie's best chance of you know, revenue in the short term. I did, and a few other people did have some feelings of misgiving about reintroducing something that had just recently failed, even though it had failed by a narrow margin. In the end, I was won over though, because the campaign, the Recover Alaska folks do have polling saying the majority of Anchorage voters are in favor of an alcohol tax, especially one that's well targeted in the way that this version is, and that's and also the thinking about fundraising and benchmarks too, about not going forward if the campaign isn't coming into place. So that did ease a lot of at least my concerns about the matter.
I'd like to note that Mr. Constant has joined us. Mr.
I wanted to
Wilbur.
follow up.
Sure.
So rightly or wrongly, it seems to me you guys considering and making decisions about tactics, you know, is outside of your purview. But that's only my opinion, and so on and so forth. I expect the economic analysis and encouraging us to budget discipline and priorities and put the economic principles and cause and effect relationships between the moves we make or don't make and so on, and the impact on the economy. Not the political advice, but that's just my perspective, and I don't know if that's in your mission statement, but I really appreciate your work.
Sure. Thank you for that. And I actually am a little bit more open-minded about sales taxes do have a lot going for them that offset some of the regressivity of it. They are very efficient and effective, and also they generally provoke less political opposition as a way of getting revenue. And so that's something, and I'm seeing it in a general sense. So and also I think people don't often realize that property taxes are actually regressive as well. They're less regressive than sales taxes, but that's not that's not something to ignore. Property taxes do come down harder on homeowners that are below median income levels. That's who pays the most of their income in property taxes.
Preach it.
So we should have an income tax, is what you're saying.
That is the most,
Thank you, Mr. Clouder. Mr. Wilbur wanted to make a comment, and then Ms. Saltel.
I'll just jump in. The Budget Advisory Commission had this wasn't the only two meetings they've considered revenues. Looking at new revenues. But I will say in their discussion, in their resolution, they were looking at all of the alternatives they were aware of. The original version, the alcohol version, and the sales tax. In her briefings, they weren't necessarily opposed to any of them. In their recommendations, they felt that they preferred the alcohol tax, but they also, and Nolan can correct me if I'm wrong, they didn't in their resolution oppose the sales tax. They basically said if that does not work, that some alternative measure of revenue needs to be instilled. And so they just considered all of the options, and for a variety of reasons, they recommended that one. But in their at the end of their resolution, it says that if it doesn't work, look at all their alternatives and consider those as well. And that was the guidance that they provided to you in the resolution. So anyway, I just wanted to make that clear. They weren't opposed to it. That wasn't their first recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbur. Ms. Saltel?
Thank you. So I feel like it's a little bit of an elephant in the room, so I'm just going to say it. But if you're going to discuss 3 tax proposals with various assembly members sponsoring them, an invitation would be fantastic, so you could have asked questions. It's not, I don't know how soon your agenda went out to talk about them, especially if the idea is to issue a resolution for purposes of bringing before the body. I feel a little bit back on my heels about the conversation because I don't know 100% what it was. And it raises a question too. I keep hearing about this polling information. Where did you get polling information from?
Through the chair, I have not actually seen the data myself, but Tiffany Hall had reported to us that from from Recover Alaska's polling that they had done, they said that a majority of voters. So I'm taking their word for it. I haven't actually seen the numbers.
And so Tiffany was at the meeting?
She was not, no. She
Okay.
provided some written commentary to us.
Okay, well, that process, if we have commissions considering proposals that are before the body, I would ask, kind of as a general practice, that they ask all of us for something. It's feeling very lopsided.
Like to attend or ask?
To either attend or written comments in lieu of attendance or whatever it may be.
Mr. Rivera, sorry, Meg. I didn't
Yeah,
hear you.
thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to be clear on the record that I didn't even know that this vote was happening, or that, and I don't think any of the members, I can only speak for myself, but, so I didn't know that the discussion or vote was happening at all.
And
So
Mr.
I didn't
Dunn-
provide anything to the Budget Advisory Commission.
Mr. Dunbar wants to add.
Yeah, I was there at the meeting where this was discussed, but I wasn't there as a person presenting our proposal. I was there because I'm the co-chair of the Budget Advisory Committee, and we always try to attend. One of us does, and so I didn't know that they were going to do this. When I got there, I saw their agenda, and it said, "Here, we're talking about these proposals." That's what it was.
Madam Chair, could I just add?
Yeah, sure.
Budget Advisory Commission meets the first Thursday of every month. They're advertised a week in advance, like every board or commission. The agendas are posted. We send them to the clerk. We send them to the BAC. So it's not a surprise. The agenda items are listed. They've been talking about revenues. They were the two items on there, and regularly, as part of their agenda, we have members from the school district, members from the school board, whoever the Assembly Budget Finance folks are in those agenda items. So anybody's welcome. They're public meetings. They're held in the Assembly's, in the Mayor's conference room, from noon to 1. So if you want to continue, if you want to show up, because they'll continue to be there. So.
Okay, Mr. Dunbar?
I just want to say really briefly, though, I do think that Ms. Zalatel's overall point is a good one. That, in the future, as these specific proposals are coming forward, it's not a bad idea to invite the sponsors to come and talk to them.
Well,
it hasn't been the practice in the past, but I think it's a good idea going forward.
And I was going to say, if you know we're going to talk about in February, and you come here, maybe you can just tell us, because you give us a report every month, what you're going to talk about next month, and then we'll all know. Mr. Constant?
I just would suggest that in any of these committees that we've established, a committee of the whole, which is just a handful of them, that where we have advisory commissions that work on these items, it might be beneficial when the clerk receives those agendas to send to all members, this is the agenda of this month's public safety or budget advisory or housing and homeless neighborhood development. The ones that are really germane to the stuff we're top of our priority list. And so if we could get a general email with those agendas, that'd be great.
Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, just to respond to that, I have been attempting to work with the administration to, I think, better get a handle of liaisons, because what I don't want to do is add additional burden on the clerk staff or add additional burden on assembly members, and so I've been trying to find a balance here. Still haven't struck that yet, but I appreciate that idea, and I think that's a good one for us to consider.
I think it would be, my guess is, Lance, correct me if I'm wrong, it would be probably pretty easy for you to just CC all the assembly
Absolutely.
members on the agendas.
Yeah.
And, if other staff who are, staffing those committees want to do that, I think it's,
Absolutely. we can
okay,
totally do that.
thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
Maybe turning this around the other way actually is recommending something I didn't do, but if we have something that is budget related that we're coming forward to, is send it to them and say, hey, we're going to be introducing this on this date, please add it to your agenda, because essentially these are advisory for us. I don't want to say you work for us, but you're there as a resource for us, and that you and the public safety and so on, and it's like, and if we had a discussion, we should be more in the habit of referring things to those groups, let them review them and bring them back to us. And instead of saying you should come to us, we should be going to you and say, hey, what do you think about this tax proposal? Or
Yeah.
budget cut or whatever we might be doing.
So we have 5 minutes, and we still haven't gotten to item D. So did you want to wrap up your update? Is that it, Mr. Clotter, or did you have more?
I can wrap up. So yeah, and I appreciate the comments too. I think BAC is probably less in the habit of making a recommendation when there are sort of competing proposals. So that's probably where I think we probably are kind of less practice at how we could work that out. I do agree in the future if create a more lively conversation and probably help us make better recommendations if we had. If we kind of focus more on getting different parties to the table to discuss different options, that might somewhat be in competition with one another. So I do appreciate that comment. Yeah, and the final thing is, as Ms. Quinn Davidson said, we do have our strategy planning session next Friday. And I know that at least the co-chairs are going to be in attendance, and I think that anybody who wants to come is welcome, especially in the morning portion, if you have input for the group or want to talk to us about any priorities.
Thank you. Can I ask a logistical question for any of those things, including BAC meetings that multiple members might elect to go to? Do we need to then notice it as an assembly thing, or how does that, or it's just publicly noticed so anyone can go, including us? Okay, great. Thank you.
Chair,
Oh, yeah, Mr. Dunbar?
I move to extend the meeting by 5 minutes.
Second.
Okay. Great. Mr. Falsey, did you want to walk us through the status of the pay correction and also talk about the SAP settlements?
I am not sure I have a choice, so I'll have I don't have a particularly long update for you today, which is good given the timeline, but I will advise you of some changes that we have made in payroll, which is, as we are looking ahead to 2020 in earnest, we're looking at the constant situation of payroll being asked to do, not just put out the payroll for every 2 weeks, but also to deal with special projects. 2020 has at least 3 special projects, which is that we are really trying to pick up everybody that has worked for us since we turned SAP on, make sure we pay them correctly by auditing all those folks. Second, we have to deal with the exit of all the MLE employees. And third, we still have other system configuration changes to make. Meanwhile, we've also begun really in earnestly the long-promised integration of SAP IT, our own IT folks, in lieu of the SAP contractors, meaning that we have embedded 2 folks, Martha Nelson and Monica, in payroll to begin really taking off some of that work that the consultants have traditionally been doing. And in this period where we are marrying that SAP IT function into payroll and designing how that's going to be looking for the rest of time, for so long as we're in the SAP world, we're also just this week informed folks that we're going to have Philippe from the IT world come into payroll and do a whole systems design for us. So that's sort of the punchline of the story, is that we're integrating those 2 teams into one, hopefully, seamless organization and throwing our maximum resources at that issue. It does seem like quite a workload and something we would very much like to bring to conclusion. That is the update for today.
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. Mrs. France?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So systems design, what does that mean at this point?
So meaning right now, we spent the last few months sort of interrogating how we are making the changes that are happening in the SAP system. And as you might imagine, there are 2 buckets of expertise, the actual payroll side and the IT side. In short description, SAP, the payroll team says, hey, something is not working or something needs to change. They document that and then they throw it over the transom and say, someone who knows about coding, make a fix. The someones who know about coding know about their world, and then they throw it back over the transom, and payroll then checks to see that the change was made correctly. The way we've been configured to date, there hasn't been any single person who's had great visibility into how both of those worlds function. And so as we are onboarding more of this computer reconfiguration function, we thought it behooved us to put someone at the apex of that system to say, I'm seeing both of these with high visibility. I want to optimize how that process is really working. So that's the short version of how Philippe ends up working is going to be.
Okay, thanks. So it's an integration.
Yes.
Got it.
Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you. With regard to the sub-bullet A, update on the SAP settlements, this is with regard to the union settlement. So there was an article in the ADN, and I think some of us have been contacted by ADN reporters saying that basically we, the municipality, are keeping these secret and not letting folks know what the different union settlements have been, or that the administration didn't adequately keep the assembly in the loop as they were negotiating these. Do you have any responses to either of those points?
Yes, so everyone in the world now has all of those settlements because we provided them all to the newspaper with absolute minimum redactions. So I hope that we have adequately satisfied all of those questions. And as I said, there was a period where we didn't talk in particular detail about which amount of non-taxable leave IAFF got versus IBEW, but that was really because everyone was similarly situated, and if we were revealing that in real time, it was going to impair our ability to come to conclusion with the various unions, and no one would want to settle first if they could wait and see what everybody else got. So I'll confess it was sort of an uncomfortable period getting through all that, but I'm happy that we have been able to say, here are all of them, and you can read them all chapter and verse yourselves.
Mr. Constant?
Yeah, somebody actually asked a question on that topic recently that made me think. So we settled at 16 million-ish of unpaid or uncashable leave. The question that they asked, and I don't know how to quite frame it right, is there a back-end cost that accrues relative to other expenses that will be due because of the exercise of that leave that we should be cognizant of? It could be increased overtime because they have to fill spots, or other variables that I might not have my mind around. Somebody threw out a number like double that. To me, which even double 16, less than $1 billion, is still a great deal. But I couldn't answer that question, and so I don't need an answer online, but maybe some thought to that.
Okay. Any other questions? I think otherwise we'll adjourn and get going with our next meeting. Okay.